The weather outside is frightful, the sea's unfishable and the river's even worse. So instead of going out fishing, I thought I'd do a video on the kayak itself, what it's like to fish with and how I set it up and why I bought this one specifically. The bare bones are that it's an ocean kayak Prowler Ultra 4.3, so 14 feet long or 4.3 metres as the name suggests, and it's about 30 odd kilograms I guess. The bow on the Ultra has been heavily shaped in order to help the kayak cut through the water in as streamlined a way as possible. It's not the fastest kayak on the market, but it really isn't too bad at all, and it's certainly quicker than my old Wilderness Systems tarpon. The other advantage of this shape is that it helps throw water away from the hatch that's on the top. Now, no amount of shaping is going to stop all water from getting over the top of the bow, so a really watertight hatch is essential. And this is probably second to none. I've never had a drop of water get inside from the bow hatch. There are drainage ports on each side that stop most of the water, and then the system here just lets nothing in. Inside, as you can see, you might be able to tell it's bone dry, but there's my battery pack in there as well. The only thing that I've ever had to mop out of here is condensation, and it closes with a really satisfying click at the top. So it's entirely waterproof. I spent months looking for an Ultra because I really wanted this centre hatch. On this side I've got space to put a lure box and a watering bottle holder as well, and I've fitted a RailBlazer starport. On the other side though, we've got a little tray to put bits and pieces in, a chopping board. All these fixings come as standard and the rectangle here is perfect for the starport HD. And then this plate here, which is where you're meant to put your fish finder. So the bracket goes on top, and this little panel here is all the cabling for the transducer and the power supply. They get nicely tucked away, and then they come out the back here. The transducer is in the water straight through the hole there, and then this lead goes into the hull to the battery. So at no point are there any wires dangling that you might get caught in either your feet or a rod. We get the hatch out of the way. Inside there's a really good recess to put fish if you want to, or plenty of space for tackle boxes or a jacket or something. I particularly like this tray area. It's a little bit shallower and it's perfect for just grabbing the odd essentials that you might need without having to open up the whole lid. I do have a rod chute. The idea is that when you're coming in through surf you can put your rods in here, but I've never been able to get mine in, so really it's a bit redundant. I may take it out and put a hatch in to the hull. That might be more useful. The big downside to the hatch really are these pull tags that you use to secure it. They're just too strong. I only use the front two because that's all I found that I really need. I may take these side ones off because they just get in the way of my feet. And they're such a faff to do when you're on the water. Then we come to the seat, which is pretty comfortable. I don't think it's as good as the Wilderness System ones. They are probably the best on the market for my money at the moment. But below that, these are really good. After sort of 4 or 5 hours, I do get a bit of a numb bum occasionally, but the back is excellent. I've also got a couple of flush-mounted rod holders here. They are only used to put a rod when I'm unhooking a fish or perhaps to redo a rig, because they're not much good for fishing. They point at too steep an angle vertically and too shallow an angle horizontally. So they just get in the way. And also when you're paddling, it's too easy to catch one of the rods with your stroke. So yeah, they're not used a great deal. I tend to put them at the back flush mounted ones. I did put a couple of these on, which are track mounts. They don't come with standard with the Ultra, and I really miss them from my tarpon. They're just so handy, so I had to put aftermarket ones on. And they sit a little higher than I would like, but it's a price I'm willing to pay because they are so useful. I've got a couple of Starport HDs on there that can slide up and down, and I can do all of that from the seat. So that's the seating area and the hatch. We'll move to the back. Firstly, we've got a couple of ram balls that I don't use. The original owner of this kayak put them on. I did have a couple of rocket launchers that went with it, but I always found that the rods just sagged down. I could never get them tight enough to hold position. So they're redundant now. There are a couple of flush mounted rod holders here that came with the kayak as standard. And I use these all the time as transport positions. They don't impede my stroke at all, and they're nicely out of the way of where my head is. So they're a really good position. In between them, I've got a starport mounted, and that is for my flag. You might be wondering what on earth a little orange triangle is going to do that a 14-foot yellow kayak won't, but kayaks have a very low profile, and if you're in a trough of a swell, you can disappear really easily. So this just goes up sort of a metre or so, and just gives other boats a little bit more visibility of where I am. You can buy these, RailBlazer make them, but I made my own out of an old rod. RailBlazer sell just the little adapters that go into the starports. So I got a couple of bits of rod, put them together, and then stitched out of an old emergency bivvy bag an orange triangle. And I put a camera mount in the middle as well for good measure. And that just sits behind the head like that. I've got two more flush mounted rod tubes that I added myself. They're there because I wanted to have two positions on each side, just in case I fell in with one rod in my hand and one rod out the side. I can put two rods in there and they're all out the way, giving me enough space to get back into the kayak. In between the two flush mounted rod holders and below the RailBlazer mount, I've got a useless hatch. It comes standard and I don't think I've ever used it particularly. And then right at the back we've got my rudder. This is not an Ocean Kayak standard one, this is one I got off a chap on eBay who makes them himself, but they're such good quality. They're expensive but nowhere near as much as the Ocean Kayak standard ones. Fully stainless steel, and it's controlled by a pulley system. I can drop the rudder down and pull it up and turn position, all from where I'm sitting. So it's a very good system. And I fitted a stainless steel bracket to it so that I can put my anchor trolley and my drogue trolley attached as far back as possible. And that's the kayak. So we'll set it up for fishing and see what it looks like when I'm actually using it. 90% of the time when I'm bait fishing in the sea, this is the setup that I use. So on either side I've got a rod attached to the track mount via a starboard HD, followed by an extender, and then the rod holder Mark II. I do like these because they give a really good hold on the rod. The anti-theft catch is very sturdy, and I've never had a problem with the rod moving about in the holder too much. So they work very well. They are a little bit cumbersome to use inevitably when you want to strike into a fish, but that's the downside of having a pretty secure setup. In the middle I've got my fish finder set up now, and then obviously I've still got room and space to work on bait should I need to on the chopping board. And these can be moved up and down as I see fit. Now if I am bait fishing, I will always have a drogue on board and most of the time an anchor as well. I use the quick release method when I'm anchoring up. It's not everyone's cup of tea and it doesn't work in every situation, but it does seem to suit my fishing best. I have done a video on which method to use in what situation, so that might be worth checking out. A length of rope attaches to the carabiner on the anchor trolley at one end. That leads to a buoy attached to the dive reel, and then you've got the length of chain that goes to the anchor. Now whatever method you use, it's worth having some kind of trip device in the anchor, so if it does get stuck, you can still retrieve it without losing the anchor. I've got one of these little devices that I got off eBay, and it's great. You set the tension so that it's strong enough to hold in a good tide, and strong enough to hold when you pull the anchor up normally. But should it get stuck, you give one good tug, and it breaks free. And then the anchor comes up upside down. Then when it's back on board, you simply reattach it to a carabiner. And that way works brilliantly. You can attach a length of rope to either end of the kayak anchor, and then the chain attaches to the length of rope. If you get stuck pulling from this end, you paddle so that you're pulling from the other end and it comes up upside down. It works brilliantly, but obviously you do have a bit of paddling to do. Finally, you can use a cable tie in exactly the same way that you use the trip. So it attaches to the anchor and then you're pulling against the strength of the cable tie. I really don't recommend you do use this method, but if you have to, don't cut the tag end off and drill a little hole in the tag so that you can attach that with a bit of fishing line to the anchor chain. Then if the cable tie does break, you don't leave a little bit of plastic floating around in the ocean. It's bad practice and it's just unnecessary. So those are the three methods that could be used. And then behind the seat, I've got my tackle box. Some people like the big Vittles vault boxes that you can get, or one of those big crates. They're not for me. I think they present too much of a shape for the wind to catch should you go broadside. So yeah, I went for something a little bit smaller. I think originally this was designed to be a beach fishing tackle box. No prizes for guessing where I got it. But I wanted to be a little more adaptable than it was to start with. So I took the hinge out because I wanted the lid to be a separate unit. I put another clip in and a handle, and that means when I turn around and I want something out of just the lid, I can take that away and have a rummage through that without having to reach around and have a look through the whole box, because that's when it just gets a bit awkward. And then I can just slot it back in place. On the side I've got my knife, and everything, as you can see by the knife and the box, is tethered down, just in case you should roll over. At least you're not going to lose the tackle as well as getting a soaking. Very occasionally, if I'm bait fishing on the river or in the sea if I'm expecting fast or sensitive bites, I prefer to have an open style of rod rest because it means you get into the fish much quicker. I made this one myself. It's a length of old rods that I've supported on a buzzer bar and then coated it in foam to protect the rods a little bit. And I've added little Lego tyres that are inside out, just as dividers. And that's all connected up to RailBlazer attachments all the way down. And it does work well. I can still use my fish finder, and there's still plenty of room to use the chopping boards, and the rods are still well supported. So that's the bait fishing setups. We'll take a look at the lure fishing setup now. The advantage of lure fishing is you need a lot less tackle. I still go out with 2 rods if I'm fishing in fresh water, and when transported they go on the same side and the net goes on the other side, just to stop them getting tangled up. It was another reason why I put in an extra rod holder at the back. So in the seating area I've got my lure box, which is held by the elastic, and then this thing, which is a sort of dashboard. I made it myself. RailBlazer do sell a similar sort of thing, but mine's made out of a couple of pieces of an old roof bar, and I've got the star ports in the middle. Underneath, a few pad eyes that hold my lures. As I said, RailBlazer do make something like this, but it's reasonably expensive, and all in all mine was about 30 quid. I did have to buy a RailBlazer attacher to hold this whole thing in place, and that leads to an extender and then a RailBlazer starport at the bottom. So yeah, it works really well. The downside is, of course, that I can't get up my fish finder. But all I have to do is take this off and then spin it round. The whole thing is connected up and wired underneath. So all it is just changing the lid over. So if I do need it, it's there. Finally, sometimes if I'm lure fishing in the sea, I do like a bit of trolling. So there's the setup. I've got one of the RailBlazer rod holders, followed by an extender, and it will be on the track mount. And there we have it. Hopefully this has given you some ideas of how you can set up a fishing kayak. And also some of the ways that you can save yourself a bit of money, because it gets expensive buying attachments, so any that you can make yourself, it's well worth doing.